Good morning and welcome to the webinar. We'll be starting here in about 6 or 7 minutes. Good morning and welcome to the Ergonomics webinar. We'll get started here in a couple of minutes. Well, good morning, everybody. We'll be starting the Ergonomics in the Workplace webinar here in just a couple more minutes. Thank you for joining us and welcome to the Ergonomics in the Workplace webinar. We'll be kicking this off here in about 2 or 3 more minutes. All right. Good morning and welcome to the Ergonomics in the Workplace webinar. We will be discussing quite a bit about ergonomics today. So just want to let you know that if you guys do have any questions, please use the chat feature there. Type out your question and we will try to get to them as soon as they arrive. So if you guys have any questions, please use that chat function and we will work through it at that point. So with that, we're going to talk about ergonomics in the workplace, and it's going to involve an assessment tool that we have used and is available for you out there, if I'm correct, Bill.
You're absolutely right. It's been around for a while now, and it's readily available for people to use. And it's a way to make an ergonomic assessment on a job that doesn't necessarily need the expertise that you might need to employ when you often think of human factors, engineering, or ergonomics. So it's a good tool, and our ask is that you guys consider employing this in your workplace wherever it might fit, because it can be a useful way to assess the job site and help prevent musculoskeletal disorders.
Yep. So with that, we're going to move forward here, and that's if everything works here real quick. A little technologically unsavvy. So I am Cody Hedberg. I am a regional manager here based out of our Fargo office. And I get to work with many different clients throughout our region and whatnot. And I'm going to turn it over to Bill Williams. He can introduce himself here. So.
Sure. I'm Bill Williams, and I'm a certified industrial hygienist. And formerly, I was an assessor for the state of North Dakota WSI program for ergonomics, and have completed many assessments. And I would say that my experience is more in the industrial setting, although I have done quite a bit in office space as well. But I have done quite a few assessments with material movement, and in general industry, and even in construction as well, not just office settings.
Okay. Well, sounds very good. I'm excited to have this conversation with you today, Bill, and hopefully be able to share some tips and tricks on how to successfully deploy and use this type of system out there. So a couple things, if you have questions, make sure that you enter them into the chat. That way they can be conveyed to us. We can real live or right away, we can hopefully answer those questions for you. Our contact information will be at the end, and then we will have a survey towards the end of this also. And then I just want to let people know that, a video of this presentation will be on our website within a day or two after this webinar. So it will be accessible if you do have some follow-up or want to reach out and re-review it or re-look at certain parts of it. It'll be available to you out there. So with that, we're going to really get into what ergonomics are and really kind of lay out the definition of that. So with that, we've got a lot of statistics that get played out, and usually we'll talk about these as a part of that tool and process. Mm-hmm. And as you can see in here, there are quite a few days away from work cases that happen due to, those repetitive stress injuries or the musculoskeletal disorders. Sorry, I was trip up on that.
MSDs, just easier to go with MSDs.
Perfect. Thank you, Bill. So we're looking at about 27 cases per 10,000 full-time workers, and it's always skewed when you have numbers, but that's a lot of injuries that we deal with. And you look at the median days, that's 12 days away. Yeah. I can't imagine not having you in the office or working with us for 12 days.
Well, and as you can see, it's over 250,000 days away totally. And then another phenomena that I've seen with musculoskeletal disorders is typically when you have workplace injuries, you'll have an outlier every 4 to 5 years. Often they're musculoskeletal and they're potentially a back injury. And so if you can extend that period of outliers where you're getting that 6-figure industry, that's the whole idea behind trying to provide you guys with something to consider to just improve the workplace a little bit and prevent these types of injuries, which are occurring all over the place and are costly to the individuals, of course, that experience them, but to the work and the employer as well.
Yeah. And as you can see, construction laborers, Obviously the more manual labor we're doing, the freight, the stock, the material movers is listed up there. But it gets into a lot of different job tasks and categories. It's not specifically just those. We can help, or this tool can really help in a lot of different aspects. And, it's another one that maybe you could throw in and utilize in some of those continuous improvement processes and different things like that. And it's an easy assessment tool that can be utilized over and over to make sure that we are trying to minimize.
And that's really the objective of this. Is Cody is going to kind of represent somebody using this tool. I'm going to try and present how it works with an example, but it's our hope again that it's something you guys could consider employing in your workplace as well.
Yep, definitely. Thanks for that, Bill. So we're really going to get into kind of the simplified version of ergonomics. We think about ergonomics and it's kind of overwhelming for a lot of people because you go, oh, how do I attack this? How do I proceed with this? And it's a big, ugly part of our workplace that how do you process it? And this will be an easy tool. So I'm going to kind of kick it over to Bill here and he can kind of walk through, the basics of this and explain it fully for us.
The word ergonomics has been around even in philosophical discussions for centuries. Some people even speculate ergonomics, which means the right fit, since we've been using tools. But in World War II is where it really started to get more complex and complicated because psychiatrists were asked to study why certain pilots were dying at higher frequencies during the training programs. And they discovered that the engineering of the controls, the placement of the dials, the accessibility to the important mechanical functions were what were leading to these problems. And that's where human factors engineering and or ergonomics, or the modern era of that, it really started. But it is a complex subject because you're dealing with a population of individuals with different size and height and weights and reach and abilities. And you're dealing with machines that tend to be manufactured uniformly. So you've got that problem. Then you've got the whole idea of biomechanics in place. And you've got the importance of what needs to be done when, and it's just very complex, but that complexity has sometimes made it aloof for people. What Reba again is an attempt to do is to just oversimplify it. So please know that this is a tool. It's one of many tools, but it's just a simple tool to kind of get us started. And then just what I'd like to do is not necessarily train and talk about the biomechanics in any level other than what we can simply understand and we can simply employ with some value and benefit. So on the next slide, I want you to look at what the first most important feature tends to be with prevention of musculoskeletal disorders, and that is a proper posture. I imagine if you guys have picked up any ergonomics, or if you've looked at the Osha guidance that came out of Washington State years ago, awkward posture is one of the key risk factors. And it's really based on how we're built. Our spine should curve, that third picture that you can see there, Cody. And now just looking at that, can't you just infer what is better posture? I think we can all do that. I think we recognize someone who has good posture. And that's a function we can all do just by assessing the workplace. You don't need training. You don't need to be an OT or a PT or a CIH or any of that stuff to recognize when someone might be in an awkward posture. And as you talked about in construction and other places, and especially with a load, you can often get an awkward posture or because of the position of your work.
So I'm going to ask you a question. We're looking at three different pictures of the same individual here in different postures. Would you say our society has gotten better at a good posture or worse with the devices and everything else that we utilize and do nowadays?
Oh, you're so on to something. I mean, there's whole practices in medicine now dealing with some of the musculoskeletal strains that occur just from the static load of an awkward posture and looking at a screen. So it's still an awkward posture and you're just doing this for an extended period of time. Surgeons do this. Surgeons stand for hours. They're not moving. It's a static posture, but it's still awkward and it causes problems. So you're definitely onto something. It's a way technology isn't necessarily helping us be natural, because naturally we're built to walk and run long distances with a curve in our spine like a shock absorber. We're more meant to move. And even if we're just sitting for extended periods of time, it creates an awkward posture.
Yeah, head out into the general public and just people watch once in a while. You know, this type of posture shows up, especially the right to, way more often than not. You know, so even just in our daily lives, we're not, as the employee, as that person, not really aware or cognizant of how we're carrying ourselves in a lot of cases.
And with Reba, you want to look at the posture. So that's the first risk factor we consider.
Yeah.
The other thing is load. What's going on? How much are you pinching? And is it of a significant weight? It tends to be broken down in like 10-pound increments and things, but load can just, of course, create an issue. You can get micro fissures in your muscles from lots of little loads, or you can get a macro tear in sprain from a large load. So that's another consideration that Reba has.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point there with the macro and the micro. You know, I mean, a lot of your back injuries and stuff, it isn't just one single cause. There's normally multiple instances and circuits or circumstances that lead into that in most cases.
Just a quick tidbit as you bring that up, a simple survey you can do with your employees is if they're feeling worn out by the end of the week and they need the weekend to recover, that can be a trigger for looking at what's going on ergonomically, because they might be able to handle it for 3 days of the week, but then those micro fissures, those sorenesses of muscle can be leading and being a greater risk. So it's just another tool that you reminded me of.
Sounds very good. So this doesn't seem like as big of a load.
Well, repetitive motion, kind of the way you're coupled to the project, this too is the third sort of key risk factor. So we've got awkward posture, we've got load, and then we've got repetitive motion, just over and over again. Even if it's easy peasy, you're doing that 100 times in a short period of time. That creates a stress issue. Key is probably the best example.
So you, like corporal tunnel and stuff like that.
Those can be symptoms that present. So those are the three things in ergonomics that I think anyone can recognize. You don't need a goniometer to measure this or any funky instrument. You just need to visually see what's going on, make simple documentation that all of us can recognize. Yeah, they're doing a lot. Oh boy, they're lifting a pretty heavy load. And ooh, his posture when he's doing it, he's twisted, he's bent, he's over. Things we can do that lead us right into Reba.
Yeah. Which is what we're going to talk about next here, is that Reba assessment tool, you know, how it really works, how you can utilize it out in your instance or in your facility, wherever it might be, because it really comes down to some observation.
Yeah,
that's really what this comes down to. So, you know, the first step is really looking at this rapid entire body assessment tool. You know, it seems like a lot when we look at this slide. You know, I mean, there's people every which direction and whatnot, but can you kind of break this down just a little bit for us, and then we'll get into it a little bit more.
I will. And I like to say a quote from Charles Mingus, and I usually like to say this quote just because I like his name. Charles Mingus is a fun name to say, but he was a jazz musician and a composer. And what his quote is that it's mundane to take the simple and make it complicated. And when you first look at this, you think that's what Reba has done. But really, what Reba has done is taken the complicated and make it simple. And Charles Mingus says that's creativity. And so even though this looks intimidating right away, I just want you to let you know that this is everything all at once, on one side of one piece of paper, kind of that A4 technology, our approach that you hear in lean toward a production system. But you look at side A, which is the neck, trunk, and leg, and you look at side B, and you essentially document and score in the middle. So it looks complicated, but everything you need to do the assessment is right here and right in front of you. And if you do it twice, you're going to feel phenomenally better. And you're going to get that idea that, oh, this is pretty creative, because it is pretty simple.
Sounds good. So yeah, you work through all this stuff, and then you come up with a numbering system, like Bill had said, in the center of that. And after you collect that data, you compile that single score out of all those different factors that you talked about, side A, side B, and you come up with kind of a level of musculoskeletal disorder risk, the MSD risk. So that really is what the end goal of this is.
It is
to score that particular activity or task or stance, and seeing, hey, is there something that we need to do with it to maybe change that up or adjust it so that we don't continue putting people at risk in those situations.
Because you're going to find there's a lot of fruit to pick when you start looking at ergonomic issues. You have to determine what the lowest hanging fruit is, or the highest priority, however you want to think about it. And again, that's another benefit of this very simple tool, where you don't need to engage the experts. You guys can develop the expertise at your level and attempt to create resolution at your current understanding and awareness by adding this tool, and you can achieve great value in this type of approach.
Yep. So we'll break this down here a little bit further there, so we'll look at it, like Bill had said, you've got labeled A and B, or section A and B on there. Section A covers that neck, trunk, and the leg area, so your main sector of your body. Then section B on the right side of that will cover that arm and wrist. Where is that placement at? And then we'll score each one of those. It will come in, and we'll show you where to get this assessment tool at, where you can download it and utilize the actual Excel spreadsheet to kind of calculate that all yourself. So it's not a big undertaking. It's a matter of just observing and doing a couple assessments on each body part and coming up with a score.
That's it. Let's go through an example then.
Perfect.
So we've got an employee here who's doing some fine motor skills with her hand on a part that she's doing some assembly work with. And using Reba, again, going from left to right and top down, we're doing column A. And we've got a neck score of 1, a trunk score of 3, and a leg score of 1. I'm going to show you how we get to that on the next screen. And it'll be a little harder to see, but I want you guys to just look at that neck. It's straight and aligned with her body. Look at her lower body. Again, it's straight and aligned, and those get you that score of 1. But can you see a slight twist and a slight bend in the trunk?
Yeah,
readily observable.
It looks like a little bit of an awkward posture to me.
It's
not one that I don't know. I could guarantee you I'm not going to want to do for an extended period of time, without having to readjust and do some other movements in there to get me out of that kind of weird position.
Spot on. So let's see how these scores are arrived at using the Reba scale. And if you see that A with the neck, trunk, and leg, and step 1, which is locate the neck position, you can see that she's in that first position, which designates a 1. Now, there's no adjustments, which is that step 1A. Many of these have an adjustment for some of the other considerations that might be in play with twisting or bending or abduction or adduction, and we'll get into some of those. But when we look at that trunk position, you can see how I put her in that 2, which is the middle one of those 5 graphs. But then if you look at the step 2A, she's twisting. And so I added 1. So that 2 plus 1 gives me that blue box score of 3. But then again, if you look at step 3, the legs, they're straight. So it's a 1. So we take those 3 scores and we go into the first table in the middle column, and we assign them. The blue goes into the blue box, the light blue goes into the light blue, and we use that matrix approach, and we come up with a total score of 2 before we add step 5, which is now back on the column A there, where we're going to add some force and load. She's about 11 to 15 pounds of stress with the twisting action she's doing in the unit that she's installing. So that adds a number 1. So quite rapidly, we've assessed the neck, the trunk, and the legs. We've assessed a little bit of the load, and we come up with a score of 3 on our A side of the Reba worksheet. If you want, we can go on to the next step, which is looking at the upper body, and particularly the upper arm, the lower arm, and the wrist. Now, what makes these at a greater risk is they're smaller muscle groups. Our largest muscle is our tuchus, and then our second largest is our upper leg muscles. They can take much more stress than some of the smaller muscle groups, which are our shoulders, our upper body. Men or women, men happen to be a little stronger, but it's a greater area of concern. So the Reba score for her with her upper arm, which you can see some shoulder elevation, you can see how it's twisted. That elbow is not pointed down. Yes, yeah, exactly.
That's an uncomfortable position.
Yep, and that's an adduction because it's away from the midline of the body, and abduction with a B is towards the midline of the body. But don't worry about that. Look at that and you just recognize, wait a minute, my elbow isn't normally pointed east or west. Yeah. You know, it should be pointed south. And then you can see that lower arm. That's
I don't even know if I can get my hand in that position with how bad shoulders are and other stresses that I've been through lately. You know, it looks very uncomfortable to me.
It's an awkward posture for sure. It's got some load to it. So now let's look again in a little greater detail at the Reba score, which will be highlighted in the next spreadsheet.
One quick, you've got the wrist. Obviously, we don't have a picture of it. Can you kind of describe what that wrist is doing? I mean, you mentioned that she's twisting already in there.
There's a material item in there that needs to connect or be assembled to this. So she's got to position it with some fine motor skills, and then that's where the torque and the pressure comes in, and it's got weight to itself as well. So she's installing it. She's assembling this unit together, and that's happening inside that can.
Okay. So that's where kind of your wrist will come in, that twisting action, a little bit of that grip, and then the weight.
I'll show you a little bit more of the wrist when we get to the conclusion part of this, is that as the picture, but for brevity I just did that, but that's definitely what's going on. So now we're on B, which is that right side of that big sheet, and we're going to go again from the top to the bottom, and we're at step 7, which is to locate the upper arm position. Now I've got her along with a shoulder being raised and an upper arm abduction as 6 points, 4 for that 90 degrees, 1 extra for the shoulder being raised, and 1 extra for the adduction. So she gets 6 for that. Now with the lower arm position, again, she's not in that first position with a number 1. Her lower arm with the elbow, if you recall, is in that 2 position. And then her wrist, because it's moving through a serious range of motion, it's not just a simple neutral position, she gets 2 for that. And what you can't see is there's a 9A, and it talks, if you want to go, we won't be able to read it, but I added a point for the 9A because of
the wrist is bent from midline is what you're adding on there.
Exactly. And so we get those 3 scores again that are colored that go into the table B. You got it.
So you've got the 2 for the lower arm, you've got the 3 for the wrist, and then you've got the 6 for the upper arm. So you're taking all 3 of those scores, and then you're just matching up where they lay out in the table.
And that gives us a 9. And again, intuitive, if we look at this, we're worried more about her upper body than her lower body and her neck, because that's the part that was a little out of whack.
A little bit more than a little, I would say. So that's how you get that 9, as you can see in step 10, and then you've got that coupling score in step 11. So how did you come up with that 1 in that coupling score?
Well, it's how well the grip is. And again, if you can keep kind of that pistol grip, that neutral grip, that's good, but she can't. She's grabbing apart and having to move her muscles into a position that requires force and strength. And so that's what gets her a 1 on that score as well. So her overall score for side B is a 10.
Okay.
The 9 that we get from the matrix plus 1 for the coupling, and that gets her a 10. Now we move into table C, where we take our score from A, which was 3.
Yep.
We take our score from B, which is 10, and we come up with a risk factor score initially of 8. Now, if you look at activity, which is the bottom 3 red numbers, the 8 gets from the chart. That activity score is based on step
13.
Yes. And this one is this is a subjective tool. You're not making measurements with a goniometer of exact angle. You're not using a spring mechanism to measure the exact load. You're using your best judgment to say, okay, this is an issue. With her, she's doing this pretty frequently, but not necessarily a 1, because it's not necessarily at the frequency there. So I gave her a partial 1. She's also doing this with a range of actions and motions. Again, so I just gave her a partial score. I didn't add them up. I didn't overemphasize. I thought she was doing a little bit of all 3 of those. So arbitrarily, I just added 1 more for the activity score because she was active, and overall my score for her was a 9.
Okay.
So now we get back to what you mentioned before. The technically the goal of this is, well, how risky is this?
Yep. And that's exactly it. You know, we get into this where we look at a 9. You know, I mean, you added that activity score. Really looking at this, it wouldn't have mattered much. We were already in that 8 to 10. So it's a high risk, and we need to do something about it. You know, we need to change that process. We need to change that approach to it. Otherwise, we have a really big chance of causing some sort of injury to this worker.
And all resources are limited, of course. You need something to help prioritize what you're going to spend your limited resource on, your time. This tool can quickly get to a decision like this and says, you know what, let's take a look at this quick, which is what we did. We didn't engage, meeting after meeting and discussion with this, that, or that. We said, let's just take a look at this. This is what was observed. That can be occurred during an audit, that you might do on a regular frequency. It can do based in response to certain complaints that people might present with. It's just relatively quick and easy way to say, you know what, this is something we should look at. And that moves us to the next level with what we do.
So obviously with this situation, you looked at it and went, hey, we need to implement something. We need to do something. So your approach, do you involve production? Do you involve who all could you get involved in this situation?
Always the subject, of course. Always supervision, and if need be, administration at that level, but definitely production, because I'm a firm believer that in the workplace, sometimes what's at balance is the quality of the work you're doing, the rate or production at which you're doing the work, but always safety. And so when those compete, you have to determine what's most important. With the safety assessment we've done here, we're saying, hey, guys, we need to look at this because now our safety important matrix is at risk here. Now, is that going to impact production? Is it going to impact quality? We don't know, so let's talk about it. But we've got a reason to talk about it because the safety factor is a risk factor.
Yeah, definitely. That's where we really need to meld all of those together. I mean, we can produce X number of widgets, but if we're hurting people along the way, it's going to cut into our bottom line. So now we may have to produce more. So that's one of those discussion factors when you get into ergonomics and changing up some of these activities is, can we maintain and produce similar numbers without causing any more issues?
For sure.
The best
and this is, I think, an OECS mantra, because I've heard it, and it's nothing we created, but it's always safety first, quality second, and production third when they compete. But and we can name the organizations, they do all three phenomenally.
Yeah.
And that is an achievable goal. It's just when they compete, you have to prioritize them. And if you're prioritizing production over quality and safety, I think we all recognize the trouble you can get in.
Yep, definitely raises your risk factors,
Yeah.
and that's where I said, if you can marry and meld all those together and they can all be on the same level, we've got a win-win situation there, definitely.
So in this case, we had competing priorities with the safety, quality, and production, and we took a look at it.
So with that, this is the controls that were implemented. I mean, it seems like a pretty simple change.
Incredibly simple. And was implemented immediately. But so many people, there's a phenomena called the theory of constraints, where people make decisions because they just didn't know. This individual was trained to do it this way. This individual wanted to do well. So she followed the rules. This must be done for a particular reason. So I'm going to do it the way I was told. Involve production, involve supervision, and said, hey, what if we just change that angle of that shoulder? And that's how we talked about this. Can we tip it over? Is she going to still be able to do it? And the answer was yes. And it was just like a aha moment. Well, of course, why not? Just do it. So we'll just change this right away. So the end result was going from a 9 to a 4.
Yeah, which is,
look at the postures, and you can see the wrist is what I'm talking about. She still has that.
Yep.
You see how she's gripping around the component, and there's still some force there. But is that significantly better? Even when you look at that wrist bend, we might be in that limited motion, as opposed to the crank she's doing, where she's bending the elbow and twisting it and the shoulder to get at that angle.
well, that's, I mean, simple. Compare the two pictures. Which one would you much rather do?
Agreed. The second one, it probably is going to increase production. It's certainly not going to affect quality, but the fact that we could say, hey, we've got these three things competing, we got to consider the safety element. It resulted in a simple, zero cost, essentially, resolution that should reduce risk. And as we know, that typically reduces the number of injuries.
I wish they were all this easy though.
Yeah,
It's
they're
not always, the very few cases are a simple fix like that, So we'll get into, not only that, but what happens if we get into, say, somebody that's in a body shop that does a lot of different buffing and grinding and stuff like that. So maybe we've got some multi-position tasks.
Yeah.
So let's throw a scenario up there and let's have Bill kind of walk us through what you're looking at. When we're doing multiple different tasks throughout the day, or maybe through half a day, whatever it might be.
Which is so common, of course, because like any tool, there's limitations to what this can do. And Reba kind of is looking at that snapshot or that short picture. But now there's discussion of people that use Reba. Well, what do we do when we have these multi-function situations? Do we take the approach like you do with air contaminants? And do we say, well, let's time weight average? Or do we take a worst case and say, well, no, this is how we do it. This is, again, where this subjective tool and your culture at your workplace has to make a determination. But I just kind of want to show you how this can make a bit of a difference. So this is a function that I imagine many people I have seen or are aware of. When you're buffing out a car, if you're in an auto body shop or any activity where you might be moving around a large item and you need to do certain functions with. When we look at these three positions, which is essentially the bottom of the vehicle, the top of the vehicle, and then the extended top of the vehicle, we happen to get scores of 8, 7, and 6. And then time weighted average, about 50% of his time is on that lower part, doing all the fenders, all the doors, the trunk, and then the 25% with the hood of the car and the flat part of the trunk, and then about 15% with the roof of the car.
Okay.
And so now we time weight average that, we would take half of 8 plus 25% of 7 plus 15% of 6, and we get that 6.65. And I don't know if you recall, but that puts us in a different level than an 8 does.
Yep.
And so it's just something you have to consider, and you might have to add another criteria and say, well, you know what? These guys are squawking about being sore by Thursday and not sure, or we have a lot of absenteeism on Fridays because they just need a break longer. So that might take this and say, you know what, we're going to look at the worst case. We're going to prioritize changing this. Or you might say, you know what, they seem to be managing it well, but some of those other qualitative factors is what people are doing to engage in this. There's no set way. It's just two ways to look at the same issue.
Yep. So now we're going to kind of break this down into how we came
Cody,
up with numbers. Yes.
really quick, we do have a question that came through the chat.
Okay.
Who is qualified to use the Reba tool?
Anyone. There is no requirement. There's nothing governing the use of this tool. So anyone that wants to take even this session and try it is more than welcome to, but there's no regulatory body that's governing this. It's just a different way to look at an ergonomic issue from a bit of a layman's approach. And in my opinion, everybody should be doing this that's involved in safety and risk reduction. Everybody should have this arrow in their quiver of tools when they're doing risk assessments or job hazard analysis, or they're trying to reduce their incident rate.
This is kind of that starting basis. I mean, one of these could take you 5 to 10 minutes maybe to look at, and if you find something that's a higher score that's a little alarming, maybe you take one of those other tools out and assess it further at that point and get other people involved and figure out what can we do to change that. It may be just a tool that, hey, we're going to assess a couple different things. We're going to prioritize from there. We've got a couple factors that are in that 8 to 9 category. We got a couple in the 4. We're going to focus on those 8 to 9s because there's a higher risk with those. It's a simple tool, like you said.
Yeah. And this is my opinion, but the more people that might be doing this, so maybe you even involve your safety committee, or maybe you involve line supervisors in doing this, and they can at least get that awareness of what's going on their line, what they're most familiar with. And this is incorporating some of the Toyota production system, is getting it as much to the line workers as possible so that they can see what's going on and say, hey, you know what? This step of our sequence on line 7, our guys are really at risk here because of the twisting and bending that they're doing. So I think we should prioritize that. And maybe these assessments turn into a discussion at a safety committee meeting or an administrative meeting and says, we've got 3 7s, we've got 2 10s, and we've got a couple that came in at 5. So can we at least dedicate, can I pull the supervisors for a 15-minute? Can we educate and orientate, but that you don't need the hired guns, the CIHs like me to come in and tell you what we think we know. This is you guys know your jobs better than we do. We can come in and give a fresh perspective, but you guys using this tool can hopefully gain that same fresh perspective because you're looking at it a little different now. And so back to the a shorter answer to that question that was a great one. Anybody can do this.
Yeah.
And that's our goal, is that more people will use this.
Yeah. It's really just based on some simple observations of what people are doing during that task and plugging it in, and you and I doing one, we may come up with a slightly different number. It's all subjective, like you had mentioned a couple times in there, but it gives you a good basis or starting point for looking at certain tasks and activities.
Yeah. So what I'm going to run through here now, and it's going to have a bunch of arrows, so Cody's going to go through this kind of quick, but this is the tool that if you Google Reba worksheet and Cornell University, this is public access. You can download this Excel spreadsheet. And I'm going to go over the spreadsheet in a little bit greater detail, but this simplifies it even more. We took the time and energy to go through that whole worksheet, which you can also download and print, but this tool I think makes it even easier. So if you click again, we start with the trunk, And then we go to the next one, we look at the neck and we look at the legs. And we assign that score based on those charts there and what we see. Then we go to part B, which is the upper arm, the lower arm, and the wrist. Then we start to combine those scores and add any load or force criteria. We then look at any coupling criteria. And using those numbers, we add the activity level. So we just punch in numbers to the variables. Then the output, which are those non-black boxes, those they generate, they do the math. And then you get your Reba score and you're that much quicker. So it's just a way to get those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 variables that you're putting in, and you get to that score that much quicker.
Yeah. Definitely. So now we're going to talk about this Excel spreadsheet that Bill brought up. You can download it. You can search it out there on any internet browser that you have. And this is what it will look like. It's just a rapid entire body assessment of that Reba tool. And the nice part about it is it's got some tabs down at the bottom that you can save these as each particular task, and then maybe go back and review it in a couple months or a month's time, or hey, let's implement a change and let's go back and look at it again.
Yeah.
What change or what score has changed there? And you can assign, almost anything in there, your date, your assessor, who's doing it, the task that you're doing, who the subject is. So you've got kind of a document that you could save per task, which is nice.
And if your OSHA 300 logs are showing musculoskeletal disorders, then I would suggest you consider a way to document and assess those risks. Yep. This Reba tool is a relatively quick and easy way. You can have quick observations, you can have brief interventions, and then you can measure the outcome. So it's that whole idea of assess, intervene, and evaluate. And you get a document that you can talk about, and you can show the powers that be or the people involved or whatever it might be, as you said. So this is just a way to document essentially the situation. Who the subject is, what's going on. This is that sheet that I showed you where you enter in those variables, and then it can generate 2 different reports, which are going to be on.
So yeah, you've got second tab there is this worksheet. Then you've got your other tabs that will kick your reports out depending on how you want them to look or how customized or how much information on there.
Yeah, and so it'll print out the whole Reba worksheet if you want that as a report, or it'll print out just that
what's on
report.
The left-hand side, just the bare basics there. So you have both options from this Excel spreadsheet.
Exactly. And so what works with your culture, what works with your team, pick.
Yeah.
Maybe you start with a report for training on the full sheet, or if that's too, whatever works. That's the whole point, is we're again trying to follow Charles Mingus's idea and take something complicated and make it as simple as possible, and then therefore be creative with our solutions that we come up with.
Yeah, definitely there. So
we do have, sorry, Cody, we do have another question that came through. Can you discuss where they find the spreadsheet again, please?
Yeah, it's Cornell University, and if you just Google Reba worksheet, it should pop up that link, and then you can download the Excel spreadsheet. And again, go back a couple slides, and when you first open it, it'll look like this one, and you'll see the instructions and then those subsequent tabs that we talked about on the bottom. I don't know if everyone's familiar with Reba, and I don't think we have a pointer on here, but at the bottom on the gray of this graphic below the big black box, you'll see instructions is highlighted, and then beside it, it says it's the worksheet assessment, which is this next page that he's going to show you. Yeah. And then the next 2 pages, report 1 and 2, look like what you see on the left, which is report 1, and what you see on the right is report 2. Yeah. But all of this is included in that free download.
Yep. So using it out there, Bill and I have touched on this multiple different times. There's a lot of different things that you can look at. Look back at your loss trends. What are you seeing? Is there certain activities or certain production lines that are seeing, those repetitive injuries or those MSDs? what are you seeing? And that's where I would start to maybe implement and focus these on, because you're probably going to get your most bang for your buck at that point. And, like we said, you start with this. It's not the only tool in your quiver, but make sure that you start with this or use a tool out there to start that assessment process. That way you're understanding, what are our biggest risk categories and can help prioritize what to focus on so that we can make those improvements or changes to minimize that risk to our individuals.
And the experts are always out there. If you're overwhelmed or if the situation is too complex, then maybe look at engaging an occupational therapist or a physical therapist or someone with advanced assessment capabilities with ergonomic assessments. If that's needed, that can always come after the fact, but you can definitely get started with this tool, and it's just a way to, I think, really pick some low-hanging fruit.
And I mean, I've used this in the past, just looking at certain tasks of, assembly type production. It's a simple, easy snapshot. You spend a couple minutes, take a couple pictures. You can do that assessment either right there or pull it back and review. It's an easy tool to put together and really kind of focus on it. And in a lot of cases, it's easy to go, hey, we should do something like this. And then they get engineering or whoever else involved, and pretty soon that solution comes forward. You can go back and do that reassessment, and that's when you realize, we went from an 8 or a 9 to a 5, 4, maybe 3. Those types of things are easy to use, and you can use it on almost any activity. That's the nice part.
A lot of companies will have an entire ergonomic program that will talk about, if you have a complaint or a situation, go through this structure and that structure. And it can be somewhat bureaucratic. And in my opinion, I've seen these implemented in a couple different healthcare systems. And oftentimes they get taken advantage of because somebody wants a new desk or a new chair, or they really don't achieve a purpose because the people concerned don't think they're being listened to. With a tool like Reba, I think you can overcome both of those. You can involve the subject. They can know that they're being heard. It's just, in my opinion, a very powerful way to deliver the means to engage with an employee that's concerned about what they're doing, potentially prevent a workplace injury, and if need be, intervene, change the process, add a step, do whatever the assessment might lead you to.
Yep, definitely. Heather, have you got any more questions that have come in there?
Yes, we actually do have a few more questions. So someone writes in, what are some of the common ways to improve Reba in an assembly line with less static time working at a table, but more back and forth walking and bending over to stack products?
Sure. Well, the goal again is, when we go way back to the beginning, is to keep the human body in that neutral position as much as possible. So, for example, you can acquire, and this is not necessarily a simple fix, and it might it cost dollars to expend, but there are many platforms that will adjust in height, either through spring or pneumatic systems, where they start with someone loading it at a greater height so that they remain in the neutral position. But as they load that material, it drops down. So it keeps them in the same position. But the overall goal again is to keep that individual in that body neutral position, eliminate the awkward posture. So I hope that's answering the question. There are a number of solutions, but the goal is always the same. What can we do to keep them in a neutral, non-awkward position? What can we do to eliminate the twisting, the bending, the abductions and adductions, the shoulder raises? So it's looking at where you want to be and saying, hey, if we just do this, or if we just have an adjustable work surface, or if, and Reba doesn't talk about this, but one of the static pressures of, say, a cement floor is your foot gear, your foot protection. You might want to consider
Mats.
Mats. You may want to consider, I've seen a solution for that where people wear essentially a spring on their feet. If you've ever seen those jumping, it's a toy that came out a few years ago. I think too many kids got hurt with it, and so they quit making it. But I've seen that intervention. So we didn't talk about that, and Reba doesn't really assess that. But just the fact of walking on a hard surface for hours can cause a problem in the lower leg that can spread up to the hips as well.
And I think that's where I would kind of double up on that is, look at that bending and that product placement when you are moving over there. You're static at a point, but then you're moving to that spot of placing the product on that pallet or whatever, trying to get that into a better position so people aren't bending over, and that's the other big thing with, assembly and those sort of things is you're going to have to look at your different operators or different assemblers in those same positions, because not all of them are the same height. Not all of them are built the same way. So that adds a complication in some cases for individuals there.
But again, the same objective is getting them to as neutral a posture as possible, eliminating, reducing load as much as possible, and the repetitive motion minimizing. So that doesn't change. How you accomplish that is where the fun really is. And how can you accomplish that? By maintaining quality and production.
Yeah. So hopefully that answered the question for you. Do you have another one there, Heather?
Yes, we do have another. Does OSHA require a written ergo program?
No. OSHA attempted to standardize the ergonomic program. I think it was during the Clinton administration. It ran into a lot of issues because whenever you're dealing with an individual, you have a whole set of risk factors that come with that individual, as opposed to the risk factors with the job function. And I think you mentioned carpal tunnel is a good example to highlight this. Some people have a genetic disposition to carpal tunnel. Should the employer be responsible for that type of injury? Those are some of the questions that came up when the ergonomic standards were being reviewed. And so the decision was to not have ergonomic standards. I believe the state of Oregon or Washington does implement an ergonomic program, but where ergonomics has gone is into the risk management world. It's recognized that it's worth doing this from a financial and a risk reduction perspective, but there is no specific ergonomic standard from OSHA. It's always a bit more of a due diligence process under the general duty clause, but that is a way you could be cited for ergonomics. But the short answer, again, and I apologize that I get long-winded, is there is no regulation from Fed OSHA on ergonomics.
Perfect. Any other ones there, Heather?
Nope, that concludes all the questions for now.
Well, sounds good. We'll Bill and I'll hang around for a couple more minutes here up until about 12 o'clock, and we'll be here to answer any more questions. So if you have them, please type them into the chat. We will be more than willing to address those for you. So we do have a poll up there. We just wanted to get some feedback of how things went and what you guys really thought of the presentation today. Hopefully we hit every star for you. And allowed you to kind of understand how to use this Reba assessment tool out there. So with that, I'm going to put up some information, for Bill and myself here, and then we're going to get into just a little bit more of, hey, we've got some other webinars and different things coming up there. So with that, we're really going to look at one of the things is, here's our contact information there, and really kind of let you know how to get a hold of us. So if you got any questions or anything on there, please, feel free to reach out to us. Bill's with us here for a couple more weeks, but then he's moving on to other things. So if you got questions, please feel free to reach out to me and let me know. And with that, one of the other things that we want to let you know is we do have continuing education credits available. So if you have a request for that continuing education credit, please let us know. shoot myself an email or shoot an email to info@oecscomply.com with your information, and we will get one produced for you. Our next webinar is OSHA at your door, and that's coming up Tuesday, October 14th from 11 to 12. So we will just talk a little bit about what to do if OSHA does show up at your facility. And with that, thank you guys very much for the last almost hour of your time. We really appreciate it. We appreciate the questions and the interaction. That definitely is helpful there. So we'll hang out here, Bill and I will, for the next couple of minutes along with Heather to see if there's any other questions. But thank you very much for your time today.
For those of you who are still hanging around, if you do have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat box and I'll be happy to read those out. If you have a more extensive question, you're always welcome to hit that raise hand button and I can unmute you and you can ask Bill and Cody yourself as well. All right, Bill and Cody, I'm not seeing any other questions come through. So one last time, if anyone has a question, feel free to put that in the chat. We'll give you all a few more minutes and then we'll close out the webinar. All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and close out the webinar. Thanks again, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you. Have a great day.